Alright, so I'll walk through how to set up a ground on your paper, and I have decided to go with complementary colors blue-green and red-orange, and in here I've started to lay out a little bit of orange, and so I think I would like to do a warm background as well as a cool one. So this will be my warm one. What I can do is just kind of wipe off as much as I can, but before I kind of dive into the blue-green. So I'm going to just grab a little bit, not too much. We're aiming for a slightly desaturated color. And you saw how little I grabbed of that and how much that really darkened that into this kind of somewhat muddy green color. So this blue is a lot more potent than this orange. I might want to, actually, you know what, I could just go ahead and mix this as the darker one because it'll be harder to keep adding red-orange to make it warmer. So this will be kind of my cool neutral. Really mix that all together. And then I can mix up my warm. So this time I'll be a little bit more careful. Maybe I'll start with a little bit more of this. And just add a teeny little tiny bit, not too much. But still, it's a little powerful. Now I recognize that this kind of cool, neutral, desaturated color I made with the blue-green will end up being pretty dark on my paper. So what I can do is I could paint it as a ground a little bit lighter, kind of as a light glaze. So I can add a little bit of water and matte medium to that. Now with this light one, what I might do is mix a teensy little bit of white to make it a little lighter. But for the grounds, I prefer to keep, for this assignment, I would just say, try not to add too much. So add a little bit to lighten that. Because white and black both also decrease the saturation. Whatever is, the more mixed a pigment is, the less saturated it is. So that includes white and black as well as gray and more than 3 colors. Alright, so that'll be one ground. And I could mix even like a little bit of gray with this one as well, but I think I'll just leave that for now. So I'll show you what I do to prepare the paper. So one way you could do a ground is just directly moisten your paintbrush a little bit. I would say if you have the larger flat brush, this is just a chip brush or a foam brush. I think in the supplies there are the white larger brushes. This is the perfect time to use those larger brushes, is for laying out backgrounds and grounds. But since I have a chip brush in this, I might just start with this. This is a mop brush. So I'll get it a little bit wet. So I'm going to do the top one, maybe with the orange color, and just show what it's like just to paint it on straight. I like to mix it a little bit with a little bit of water. Alright, so I got the mop brush. So usually I might start at one end and you kind of want to gently go back and forth. As you can see, it can start to look a little bit streaky, which usually isn't good. For a ground, you usually want to try to get nice and even as possible. And of course, you know, so I kind of put it down and then I kind of feather it with my brush. If it's too streaky, I might go the other way, but I try not to be too finicky about it. I'll go grab a little bit more. All right. So to water down one of your grounds, you can add matte medium to it or just a little bit of water. If you add too much water to acrylic, that breaks down like the chemical bonds of like the acrylic polymers. So usually it's recommended not to have more than like 50% water. But for this, it doesn't really matter too much. As you can see, the paper starts to buckle a little bit as moisture is introduced into the paper. This is a little bit dark. I might further. So I don't want to mess with it too much because this is not what's called a primed paper. This is just straight paper. I have not put what's called gesso on it, which is usually ground up gypsum or some other similar white mineral that kind of changes the nature of the paper. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to go ahead and just for this demo, I'm going to go ahead and do the other one. Now with this one, I want to show another way to prepare the paper. So I just kind of went straight and did that just fine, but it's still a little bit streaky. Something you can do beforehand is with either your water spritzer or a slightly dampened sponge, you can gently dampen your paper in advance. I don't want to spray the other ground I've already done. Basically with acrylics, until it's completely dried, it's still susceptible to water. So if I were to drip water on it, that would disturb it and it would be hard to fix. So I'm just gonna maybe, here we go. So you can either just spritz it a little bit, or if you have a damp sponge, hopefully preferably a damp clean sponge. I use this for lithography in the spring, so it's a little messy. Okay. And what this does, it releases what's called sizing, which is in all paper. Usually it's a gelatin-like substance or starch that is added both internally with the pulp of the paper inside, not always, and oftentimes there's external sizing, which is applied to the outside of the paper. And it has really interesting chemical properties that both protect against moisture and outside substances, but sometimes it can also be receptive to it. So lots of paper, the reason there's so many types of paper in an art store is that different artists like different properties of paper, because some mediums require more absorption than others. Some you kind of want the paper to be protected from like getting bumped or scuffed, and so the sizing helps protect the paper as well. So anyway, what this does, if you feel it a little bit slightly moist, I'm going to add a little bit more on this side. And so the paper is starting to expand a little bit. So one of the good things about pre-taping it down is, so long as you don't aren't too finicky with it, it should be okay. So I'm going to use the chip brush for this one. So it's already a little, this is a cheap brush. The bristles are kind of spread apart. So I'm going to take a little bit of water, not too much. I'm going to try to get this on here as evenly as possible. Try not to splash too much. And I'm going to, so because this paper was already pre-moistened, it kind of takes it. So this is a very bristly chip brush, so I might not usually recommend this, but I think sometimes really large brushes you might have found like get very expensive very quickly. So now I'm kind of going back over it and trying to just kind of hide how streaky it is. Maybe I'll go in the other direction, but I still want to do this when everything's still damp. In some ways that gave it like a kind of a slight, almost woven looking texture with the chip brush. So if you have something like a chip brush and you're not able to get it 100% smooth, you might do something like this where it kind of mask it, but try to make an all over as even tone as possible. It's a little heavy in these corners, so, but remember, I don't want to like keep fussing with this too much because I don't want this to pill. So before you do anything else, you want to let this dry, especially if you're doing collage. You want this to be dry if you're going to be gluing things on top. But before you keep adding to this, it's usually better to let this dry first. So you can speed up the drying with a heat gun or a hair dryer, but just be sure to go over it back and forth nice and evenly. You want to stay about, 10 to 12 inches away, and go over it as evenly as possible, because if you dry it in like one spot all concentrated, it'll tend to buckle more. So this will start to buckle a little bit, but if you let this dry a little bit, it should start to shrink. It'll be a little easier to work with. So don't take the tape off until the very, very end of your color study.